This rolling kitchen island, made of solid maple, is without question the nicest piece of furniture that I've ever made, and is the first piece of furniture that I've ever had commissioned from a complete and total stranger who found me on the internet. If you have a few minutes, I'd love to show you how I built it. The nicest furniture needs the nicest wood, so I headed up to Highland Hardwoods to grab some maple. I always try to buy boards for specific parts, so I labeled them as soon as I got home to avoid confusion later. I started by milling up the wood for the legs because all the other dimensions reference off of those. This is one of the first projects that I did with my new-to-me Grizzly 8-inch jointer, and I'm loving not having to drive 20 minutes to use one. All right, so we have here all of our leg boards cut. And what we're gonna do is take two of these thicker pieces and sandwich them around one of the thinner pieces. And that is going to create a nice square block that we're then going to plane down to 3 inches. But what we need to do is make sure that we think about which faces are going to go on the outside and which are going to go on the inside and which ones should go together. I glued up all the leg blanks in one clamping setup. Hindsight being 2020, I should have bought thicker lumber and made each leg from 2 boards instead of 3, but they still look great. I jointed and planed the blanks down to final thickness of 3 inches, making sure to keep the top and bottom boards of the sandwich the same width so they wouldn't look weird. Next, the stretchers. All right, so I spent some time going through and labeling all the pieces for my shelf stretchers. This is really important because this is going to be one of the most visible pieces of the project. So I want to make sure that the grain patterns match exactly what it is that I'm trying to do. This piece here is going to be for my 16-inch short stretcher. This is going to be another fancy short stretcher. This grain pattern here for the drawer faces. And I actually cut this bigger than I needed to because what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this right here as the center of the drawer faces so that one drawer will get that batch and one drawer will get that batch. And I think that that will look pretty cool. I'm going to use this piece over here as the back stretcher. Again, there's nothing significantly interesting about this piece, but it's nice and clean and has a fine grain pattern. More milling and squaring up the boards, using stop blocks to ensure that the matching pieces are exactly the same size. I also drilled for the countertop bolts now to avoid fighting with them after assembly. Spoiler alert, I still had to fight with them. Now to plan and cut all of the joinery. I started by auditioning the legs for different positions. The nicest need to be on the drawer side and the ugly bits I hid behind the stretchers. This was, by far, the most complex set of domino joinery that I've ever done, so I took my dear sweet time about it, starting with the simplest ones and getting more complex from there. Here's how I got my joinery right. First, draw it out. I traced the stretchers onto the legs so I knew exactly where each joint was supposed to land. Next, I maintained reference faces on the tool itself for matching domino parts. Measure as little as possible. The Domino has built-in alignment tabs. Use them. I also plan offsets so they match common plywood sizes, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, or 3/4 inch, so I can use scraps to set my distances. Finally, I only use the tight setting on one pair of matching mortises per joint. The others get the middle loose setting. If everything is tight, it's nearly impossible to get all the tenons to slide in at once. Pro tip: when dry fitting, sand the dominoes down a little bit so they slide in and out easily, or you're going to be pulling out the vice grips to wiggle some free. They also make domino trim plates to shrink the tenons instead of having to sand them all. I linked to one down in the description. While we're dry fitting, I have a request I don't often make. If you're enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to share it in addition to liking or subscribing. This is the kind of project I want my woodworking business to be known for, and every share helps. Thank you so much, and now back to our regularly scheduled program. I used these PowerTec casters, but the bolts were massive. I had to hunt down huge threaded inserts online because no store near me sold them. I also didn't have a tool large enough to actually drive them in, so I bought a short bolt that fit and used that to drive them with some wax to help smooth out the process. They still shrieked the entire time. I added a 1/4 inch roundover to the 3 outside edges of the legs. I left the interior edge square so there wouldn't be a gap at the shelf corners. Speaking of shelves, I also added some small brackets to the appropriate stretchers to hold the shelves in place. Then, sanding. Sanding is the art of patience and time. That's all it takes, really, patience and time. That and a really great podcast. Osmo Poly-X is one of my favorite finishes, both in how it looks and how easy it is to apply. Wipe it on with a white Scotch-Brite pad, then buff it off with some rags a few minutes later. Lightly sand in between coats. The instructions say you don't need to, but it does make a difference. I never know if it's faster to tape over the glue areas or just sand off whatever finish gets on them before assembly. I went with the latter on this project, and it wasn't too bad. On a piece this big, doing it all in one glue up is creating problems for yourself. I did the Carcass in 2 separate glue ups because I couldn't imagine having to keep it all square at once. On the final glue up, ratchet straps across the diagonals helped pull everything square. From here, I added some structural supports to keep the Carcass from racking and to support the drawer slides and finished the drawer area. This little strip of maple is to hide the edge of the plywood bottom of the drawer box. During all this drying time, I also moved on to the countertop, and this is where the problems started. I ordered this maple countertop to go on top of the kitchen island from one of the big box stores, and I just checked it quickly when it came and it looked right. And then when I went to unpack it, I found out that it's not one countertop, but two pieces of countertop, which is not at all what I want. So what I'm trying to decide now is if I should just return it and get the right one, but the problem is the right one won't be in for a week or two, or if I should just trim it down myself and glue it up. So I'm going to stare at this for a little while and think about it and be annoyed.
Future John here. Past John was wrong. What actually happened is, somewhere in delivery, someone must have dropped it and snapped it in half almost perfectly along a glue seam. The fix was the same though, or so I thought. I trimmed the edge and glued it back together with some dominoes to help with the alignment. I didn't joint it because I wasn't convinced I could do so safely with how tall and heavy the pieces were. That was a decision that came back to bite me. I let the repaired countertop dry overnight, and then I started finishing it. As I was cutting it to length, though, I realized I must not have cut the edges square because it had a deep bow in it. So, I cut it in half again along the original glue seam, made sure to square the edges, and glued it back up again, this time doing everything I could to keep it flat. Bang on, baby! So I sanded and trimmed it again. There was a bit of a gap in the glue seam, but nothing I couldn't hide with a little glue and sanding. Or so I thought. While that dried, I added angled corner brackets to the carcass for more rigidity. Then I screwed the drawer bottom into place and cut the two shelves. There's a bit more of a gap to one side than I wanted, but 1/16 isn't terrible overall. The last piece I needed was a divider between the drawers. I debated whether to run this the full length of the drawer box or just have a small piece in front. I went with the small front piece so that you can reach from side to side when the potato masher decides it's going to lock one of the drawers shut. I spent some time filling in a few little cracks and crevices with clear CA glue. Then I flipped the countertop upside down and, with my wife's help, lifted the base onto it. I aligned everything exactly like I wanted and marked where the threaded inserts needed to go. My Miles Craft portable drill press made quick work of the threaded insert holes. Before installing the inserts, I added 3 coats of finish to the top and the bottom. And that was when I saw it.
I have a perfectly functional countertop, but the problem is you can see the glue seam right down the middle really, really well. It's not as tight as I want it to be. And so I'm not particularly happy delivering that to the client. It's not really representative of my best work, and it really, really draws the eye because it's directly in the middle of the countertop.
I cut the countertop in half once again, re-glued it once again, and this time sanded the seam while it was wet, and waited and prayed that it stayed flat and invisible. Well, prayed and installed the drawer slides. Blum are great. Always install them square to the face frame, not to the side of the carcass. Depending on how good you are at woodworking, those aren't always the same thing. And then I risked a glance at the countertop.
All right. I am so glad that I decided to fix this countertop. It looks so much better after I recut and re-glued everything. Got it out of the clamps now, and it's not perfect. I'm not going to say that the seam is completely invisible, but it is much, much tighter, much, much closer, and there are parts of it where you can't tell the difference between the original seam and the new seam that I put in. So I'm very, very happy with this. I'm glad that I did it. This is going to make the countertop look a lot better. And from a distance, you can't see much of the seam at all.
So I sanded, trimmed, and finished all over again. And then finally could install the threaded inserts. Which were now in the wrong place, of course, by the width of my table saw blade. So I used my plunge router to slot the back holes. This allows the countertop to expand and contract with the seasons without cracking, so I was going to have to do something like this anyway. There are literally hundreds of videos on how to build drawers on YouTube, so I won't go into a lot of detail. Measure based on Blum's instructions, cut all the pieces to the same size, and edge band them before assembly. And sand and finish before assembly too. If you did everything right, they should pop right into place. Then finally, I could install that countertop that I'd finished 3 times with some bolts into the threaded inserts that now fit perfectly. Last step, the faces. If you remember from the very beginning, the drawer faces were cut to be continuous grain. They just had to be trimmed to size, sanded, and finished. My handy-dandy Craig cabinet hardware jig made quick work of the hardware installation, and some playing cards measured out consistent spacings. Then I just screwed everything into place and installed the pulls. Delivery was part of this project, so I wrapped everything in furniture blankets and brought it to my client's house. Unfortunately, I didn't take any pictures there, but trust me when I say that it looks very happy in its new home. And I'm happy that despite the challenges and many repeated steps, I was able to finish the nicest piece of furniture that I've ever made.
Thanks for watching.